Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Our guest today is Joseph Macolino. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Joseph.
Yes, you are.
Excellent. Joseph is an author, or as he calls himself, a chronicler of history, the history of a land called, a planet? A place called Evorath. So, Joseph, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm as you already said, I'm an author of the Evorath series. So I write fantasy. From the time growing up, that was just always what I gravitated to, fantasy, sci-fi. Um, the what really got me into reading was Lord of the Rings. I've always been a big Trekkie, watching from the original series growing up, the Next Generation, Voyager, like anything with
Nice.
different creatures out of this world just has always been in my wheelhouse.
Oh, fantastic. We're on the same page there. I think I'm going to turn the camera. Yep, there's some Tolkien maps on the other side of the wall. And of course, I got all the books behind me. A lot of them are fantasy, so I'm on the same page there. Fantastic. But then you liked it so much that you started writing your own?
Yeah, so yeah, I get that ties in perfectly to about me. So yeah, I was never exactly the most popular kid in class. I was often the little nerdy kid. And especially in middle school, the few friends I had kind of had left and gone to different schools.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden I'm like, I like have nobody here. But it was right around the time that the internet was becoming a thing. I had a computer in my room that I built, and I say it that way. That at the time I'm like, oh, I built my own computer. Really, my dad got some computers from work. He got like a half dozen of them. I took them all apart, reassembled the best one.
Reassembled.
So I took some RAM from one, took the biggest hard drive from another, put it in the one with the best motherboard.
Right.
So it's
That
not
that
like it
counts as
was
building for a middle
it,
schooler, I think.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. For my age, it was, I think, as much as you could expect. But on that, I would go and I joined. At the time, there was a Flash-based game. So back when it was Macromedia Flash. So now I don't think is even like used
Yeah,
anymore
I
at
think they got
all.
rid of Flash like a couple of years ago completely.
Right? Yeah, so that's gone completely. But so this was back when it was still owned by Macromedia. There was a game called Adventure Quest that I started playing. And again, loved fantasy, find this game. I was one of the early players, but long and short of it, that got me into online role playing. So I started role playing there. Then there were some other people there who started their own role playing forums. So I went over there and it just cascaded. So by high school, I actually kind of backed off of the role playing because I was in a new school. I actually made some friends, which was great. That's
Nice.
important. People need real friends.
I
Even
suppose,
though,
yeah.
yeah, a few at least. um, but as a result, I'm not doing that anymore. Well, guess what? I just started writing my own fantasy. So at the time when I started it, it had nothing, I had no intent to write stories, like to be a novelist. But I got that itch for fantasy. I loved studying mythology. I loved all things fantasy, period. So I just started to, at the time I had a Toshiba, excuse me, I had a Toshiba Pocket PC. And I'd spend every night, not every night, because some nights I'd be on the computer playing Civilization till the next morning. But the nights that I wasn't playing video games all night, I'd be laying in bed and I'd just be mapping out ideas like, oh, and so yeah, there'd be centaurs and they'd have this type of culture. And just from the beginning, it wasn't just about, throwing ideas together. It was about, okay, how can these ideas blend? What makes sense with them? Why would
Mhm.
elves and centaurs and these cat folk, which I call felites, and the lizard folk, like why would all of these people trade with each other? What would their world look like? And just going through that thought exercise and building it out. And then eventually, this is both a abridged and a very long way of explaining all of this. Eventually, though, in college, I'm like, you know what? I have a whole world. Like, I even have some history ideas and like historical events that happened with these demon wars that took place in the ancient past and this and that. I'm like, I might as well start writing stories about it. And that's when I decided, and that's when the first book was kind of born. It did take about a decade before I really got in the game properly and got my novels out there. But that is, again, kind of an abridged version, but also a wordy way of putting it. I'll zip up.
No, nice. Well, I mean, it's understanding it would take so long. I mean, a decade, it sounds like a long time, and it is, but you think about all of the work that goes into a book, and I think people who have never tried to actually write an actual novel don't understand the immense amount of work that goes into it. And you think even the background stuff that you did, tack all of that on with designing the world and how it all fits together. But all of that is crucial to an end product that actually works. And I think that's one of the things that made Professor Tolkien's work so enduring is that he spent so many years developing the world and the mythology and the history. And similar to you, I think that it kind of, the Lord of the Rings kind of flowed from the mythology that he had developed for his world. So it's
Yeah.
very, very interesting.
Well, and I know I don't know about you, so we have kind of that similar nerdy interest. Like I don't know about you, but the thing that it's always a pet peeve of mine when I'm watching an episode of Star Trek, let's say. Here's an easy example. When they
Mhm.
first introduced Trill in Next Generation, they don't even look like the Trill end up looking like in Deep Space Nine, right? Because they didn't think ahead, because they didn't actually plan out, they're just putting out a sci-fi show without thinking of the bigger. So it's like I'd rather avoid all of that. I want consistency. I want the universe to make sense. I don't want to run into that situation. And I do think every novel, whether it's based on reality or whether it's a high fantasy like I write, takes a lot of time. And there's a lot that goes into it that we don't see. Editing, a lot of times you'll be chopping entire chapters
Mhm.
out of there. But I think especially with high fantasy, like readers don't realize how much goes into that because again, it's not even just book to book; it's all that world building, a lot of which never going to see the light of day. Like a lot of the notes and the backstory and the lore that I have, if I guess eventually it probably will in the form of like here's the textbook, here's the lore. Like eventually I do picture releasing some books that are like the magic of Evorath and just have a whole compendium of all my notes, do a little editing, make them into book format and be like, hey, this is a magic book, this is a
Nice.
lore book.
But
But
even if it's not present, like if it's not there for people to read, you can still feel the presence of it when, especially when a book is really well written, because it affects the way the story is told and it affects the world that's presented. And without that background, things just feel kind of hollow.
yes, that's the word I was thinking of. Exactly. They feel hollow. Yeah.
Mhm. Now, all of that is even before you get to the stuff with publishing a book. And now there, nowadays, classically, you had to go the route where you get an agent and you find publishing. Nowadays, there are online options where you can do it, bypass that route completely. How did you go about actually getting your work published?
So yeah, so that's part of why it took so long is I did a lot of research into the publishing process. I'd go to a lot of like those Comic-Con type conventions, talk to the authors there, get their thoughts. And I just found a lot of the people along the way. And I met more than a handful of authors who were traditionally published and switched to self-publishing. And that helped inform what I did, which was just go straight to self-publishing. And the other side of that I'll say is if you look at what agents are looking for now, which is something I've still toyed with trying to get it out to agents, but if you actually read, every time I go reading, I'll read dozens of agents. Like, what are they looking for? They're usually looking for very specific stuff, which has nothing to do with epic fantasy. It's usually like we only are looking for romance authors, or we're only looking for LGBT plus authors, or we're only looking like, and it's if you actually look into it, people will be like, oh no, it's not like, yes, it is. If you actually go to try to query an agent, the market right now just wants very niche specific stuff that none of which apply to me.
Mhm.
And most of it, again, honestly, even just finding people who want high fantasy right now is pretty slim pickings. Like there's very few agents that are even accepting queries from authors that write high fantasy, which is
Yeah, which is strange because it's clearly a popular genre. I mean, people really like it, but all of these agents are, of course, trained in liberal arts at the universities who push DEI and all of the progressive agenda, which even if people believe that it has good intentions, often it does not end up that way in the actual practice. So,
Yeah.
uh, example right here of cutting out what they could ordinarily get a lot of money from and have a good business model, but now you're doing it yourself. So you get to keep all that
And
money.
it's yeah, and the way I look at it is they're the ones who are going to end up missing out because
Hmm.
it's not like Evorath. I still have a day job at present, but when I eventually am out of my day job, it's going to be like, well, that's great. I don't have to give 15% or whatever it is to an agent. I get to keep all of this myself. So like
Yes.
it's that plus and minus, but it is. I will say there's a difference. It's in some ways it is almost too easy to get published. I hate to from a liberty mindset, it's not. But from a fan of the arts, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm self-published. They you open their book, it's like, wow, this first paragraph has three different perspectives. It has past,
Oh,
present, and future tense. Like
oh.
I've seriously I've read some indie books and I'm like, oh my gosh, this person couldn't even like they don't just need an editor, they need to go back to school to write.
You're
Like because
self-published, but maybe you shouldn't be.
yeah, exactly. So again, I and unfortunately that stigma then gets attached to everyone who self-publishes.
Mhm.
So they
But
assume, but it's like, no, we go through, I send it to editors, they go through multiple rounds of editing, there's cover artist that gets pulled in. Like it's a professional endeavor. And I buy ISBN numbers directly from Boku, which is like the official identifying service, um, which is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. You can self-publish now too without even doing that. But when you do that, usually you're sacrificing some of your creative rights. Because, for instance, Amazon will give you free ISBNs. If you go that route, then Amazon kind of owns your creative work. Like you need
hmm.
to own your ISBN to own the work, really.
Hmm.
Um,
No,
so
it's an important point for sure.
yeah, it's a whole. It's interesting. Again, when you look at it, even readers a lot of times don't realize all the stuff that goes on in the background. Like avid readers are like, "Oh, I read so much." I no, go publish a book, and then you'll learn. There's a lot of things that are questionable, and there's a lot of just. Even though it is easy, in some ways there is a barrier, and I think that barrier is just because, to some extent, like we said about the agents, like the traditional publishing still wants to have a chokehold. So they try to make. I even have a crazy conspiracy theory, which I don't even believe myself fully, that some of the garbage indie books are put out by publishers to just flood the market with just crap. So they say,
Uh,
see, indie stuff is garbage. They just see they can't even edit, but it's actually like
Maybe
anonymously
so,
just.
but I mean, you flip it around because the professionally uh, published books from big presses, I mean, they look nice, they're polished, grammar's all perfect, but I mean, the subject matter is often just trash. I
Yeah.
mean, you especially when they get on these trends. You remember Harry Potter, of course, was super popular. And then for like 10 years after that, there was this spate of books where there's this orphan who gets accepted to some kind of magical community that he's an important part of. And you're like, what the heck? This is just Harry Potter with a different label on it.
I'll actually, it's funny you bring that up. That's another one of my publishing pet peeves is if you look into the people that's a thing though. Like that's what's encouraged even. And there
Mhm.
are, there's all these things if you're an author like me just trying to get that breakout, if you will, like to be able to make this a full-time thing. Um you'll find a lot of the gurus and these six-figure authors and these people writing independently published who are doing it. They're making a living full time. But what they recommend is to write to the market. And what that means is look
Mhm.
at the top 100 books, see what they do in your genre. So, okay, choose your genre, look at the top. look at their covers to decide what your cover art should look like. I ignore that. I just want a cover that I think is cool, I think matches the theme, and then I think the style matches my writing. Again, art is not some formulaic. It just drives me nuts sometimes that art. And not to mention my day job, I'm actually a data science person. So like, don't get me wrong, I just hate merging the two. So I appreciate the science, I appreciate those formulas and how they do it. I just hate it. I think it
Yeah,
I
I
think it
understand.
destroys art. Like I think art needs to be from here, not some equation that you add up.
And
But that's
sometimes, I mean,
go ahead.
it works out sometimes. I'm I'm thinking particularly of Brandon Sanderson, who you undoubtedly know his works at least, and I've enjoyed his books that I've read, but they are very like, formulaic. Like there's the build up, there's the reversal, and they've got everything in there exactly. It's like he uses a formula to put them together. And they're good, they're entertaining, but at the same time they feel kind of almost not quite sterile, but kind of like it came off of like something that's mass produced.
Yeah.
You know, it's different from a handmade thing. And you can tell, even if the mass produced thing is it's a good thing, but it's just not doesn't have that touch, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
But nothing
It's
against you, Brandon. If you happen to watch this, I do like
yeah.
so.
Yeah, go ahead and watch this. Hey, check out Evorath while you're here. You
hmm
know?
Speaking of Evorath, Joseph, I first encountered you and your work on the Bad Roman podcast, and of course, he talks about the intersection between Christianity and the state, particularly in realms of freedom and voluntarism, sometimes. So, I wonder if you could tell us what is the connection between your books and the philosophy of freedom, liberty, voluntarism.
Yeah, so the easiest answer to that is to just say that there's definitely allegory. So Tolkien's famously like anti-allegory, but then if you listen to him later, he admits that there was allegory, like there was this whole battle.
Just don't make
I'm
it
just
obvious.
well,
That was the
that's
thing.
exactly it. So that's where I'm at. Is I'm like, look, there's allegory. Frankly, I go back to a quote by George Sand: art for art's sake is an empty phrase. Art for the sake of truth. Art for the sake of the good and the beautiful. That's the faith that I'm after. I might have misquoted that a little bit at the end, but essentially, I believe all art should have a purpose. It should have a message. I think all art should be allegorical to some extent. I even have a crackpot theory that all art, period, is inspired by God. I think all of it. And I think we're all artists to some degree. I think usually we end up getting that art slammed down by formal education and just the
Mm,
constant programming we received instead of being artists and free spirited and just loving our neighbors and everything. We're pigeonholed into this box of this terrible Prussian education system.
right.
Um, I just digressed a little bit. Let me rein it in. Um, so allegory is part of it. So there is a big, and I'll admit, when I first started writing, if you read my first trilogy, just Evorath is the name of that trilogy. And so there's 3 books because it's a trilogy. The first book to the third book, you'll notice an evolution of my own philosophy. So the first book would be more the libertarian leaning, but also still statist. The second book is when I was about yeah, I think that the state is never there, but I'm not quite ready to admit it. The third book is like, yep, that's what's happening. And that's, at the end of that book, the some of the main characters are kind of banding together to join a community that's being founded by a former Lizak, that's the lizard folk. Um, I tried to keep some of those names easy, so a lot of the times I do some mythology references, I do and some names are just like very, oh, as someone hears that, they could probably guess what a Lizak is. It's a lizard person.
It pops into your mind, yeah.
Yeah, in context especially, it's like, oh, okay, this
hmm
is a dude who's a lizard. Um, but so this guy was a prince of the lizard kingdom, and he's like, I'm going to, but he's growing up, he's being educated, and he's noticing he actually is a he is faithful to his goddess Evorath, which I guess I didn't mention yet, but Evorath is not just the name of the world, it's also the name of the goddess who created it. So there's kind of some of that mythology influence, people who know of like Gaia or something from mythology. It's that similar type of idea. Of course, she's more like God than she is like any pagan god. But so she's the creator. But anyways, he's faithful to that. He studies, he knows, he has some servants, and basically he's like, this is wrong. Like he realizes it's wrong, so he starts a new community. And then again, he just welcomes anyone who wants to live freely and live as Everath would have you live, which is not to pay protection money to the mafia. It's not to have some strange social hierarchy based on, well, you were born with X, Y, that guy's your dad, so you're better than that guy because that guy he stinks. So like again, just these crazy things which we act like we don't have in America, but like you'd have to
Mm,
be blind to think that we don't have that in America.
yeah.
But so again, I try to though the way I describe it is Everath is meant to be like it's meant to be enjoyed as just a fantasy. Like if you want to just read high fantasy, get lost in a fantastic world, and just read about magic and wizards and dragons eventually. Thinking maybe I'll do the George R. R. Martin tease, right? Dragons are coming eventually in one of the books in the future, but just they really are, but it's a while off. Don't get your hopes up. But yeah, so that's the thing. But there is a lot of Christian allegory. There's a lot of allegory for liberty and just the natural rights of people.
That's neat though. I think when there's a line, I think, with allegory, when you can connect it to things that actually exist in the real world, or when, for example, like when there's a system of religion, I can not say, oh, well, this is like this in our world and it's the same kind of thing. But we have systems of religion in our world that people are faithful to. And when that's also in the book, that helps it seem more real to me anyway. But there's a line I think with allegory. They've got the Rings of Power on Amazon. The second season is going, and I watched the first season, and the the person who's trying to take over the island nation of Numenor, he's dressed in orange, right? This loud, brash, orange politician. I wonder what they're trying to say with that. What could it be? And his supporters are like, the elves are coming here to take our jobs. You're like, what? What are you doing? It's just the allegory, if you even want to call it that, is so painfully obvious that they're trying to talk
Yeah,
about not, oh, their political systems, but it's like this politician and these people in our world right now. It's a bit on the nose and a bit much. And not only would that probably offend people who are of that political persuasion, but it gets dated really quickly. Yeah.
that's the big to me that's actually the bigger issue because culturally it immediately is like, oh well, this is only relevant to this tiny thing. Like it's not, there's no staying power to it when it's so specifically. But I actually like to joke that see, growing up watching Star Trek, I saw how to do allegory right and how to do it completely wrong. You think episode to episode, some episodes are like, okay, is painfully obvious what you're talking about, and it's just so tacky, it's just so badly done because of it,
Hmm.
versus some episodes it's like, oh my gosh, that's what they were talking. You get to the end and you're like, this was all allegory for this issue. Like this was
Hmm.
all of, but it's like again, there is a very clear. Um, and I know a lot of people don't, and they're probably right not to. I still consume a lot of entertainment, um, And part of it for me is just to keep a pulse on it. I definitely consume less than I did, especially I moderate things, and I'm like, I'm only watching this because I want to kind of know where the culture, because there's still, writing any form of art, you need to be able to reach people to some extent. I can't be in a box and just write for me. I need to think about the greater population. But there's a show, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, that ended a few years ago, and it was a comedy about police, and most of the show was like making a joke out of police. It was a funny, it was just a good show. The last season was just like so on the nose, and one of these like hardcore like aggressive police officer all of a sudden is anti-police brutality and quits the police because of it, and like there was just this whole thing, and I'm like, look, I even agree with a lot of what you're saying, but this season sucks. It's horrible because
Yeah.
it's just so on the nose that you've ruined. It's no longer funny. It's now just some like over dramatized, in your face, this is what we believe you should too, or you're awful. It's like,
Hmm.
no, you're doing
Yeah.
it wrong.
It's not,
Like,
it makes me think of because the on the subject of police and fantasy, the the method, I guess, the process, culture of being a policeman and enforcer for the government doesn't really change very much from culture to culture. And that crosses over very nicely into fantasy, of course, because you're making up a culture. And it makes me think of Terry Pratchett. Some of his favorite, or my favorite books of his are the Watchmen series with Commander Vimes. And it's because the policing that he does, even though it's a fantasy world with a fantasy government and everything is different, but everything is also so much the same. And he can pick fun at or poke fun at the follies and foibles of the police without, like you said, oh, this is current day, and so you need to pay attention to this because this is how we feel about current day politics. And that just it falls
yeah,
apart because current day isn't going to be tomorrow, and it wasn't yesterday, and people aren't going to feel the same way very soon.
yeah. No, it's another a more nerdy one is the way the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the way they've gone,
Uh,
and I'll give
mhm.
my brother some credit for this because he brought this up first, and I'm like, no, you're absolutely right. But watching I forget what the show was called. Was it Civil War or what? No, the one with it was the one with Falcon becoming Captain America.
Oh.
Um, but he's like, that show, the premise made no sense. He's like, these people just had an alien dictator wipe out half their population, then it came back, and you're telling me racism on Earth is still a thing? Like, people still care about a black guy versus a white guy? No, I'm sorry. Aliens come and invade Earth. Any pretense of that is gone.
Everything
Like,
changes.
yeah, like we're not going to just go back to, oh, well, this is a modern day issue, so let's show this in our TV show. No, that was
Hmm.
stupid. It made no sense anymore. Like,
Yeah. And that's that's of course a big thing that goes not only into or should go into shows like that, but writing fantasy and really any fiction is trying to think logically about what would really happen if aliens showed up or if people had magic or whatever. The logical things that would flow from that change in the world or a world that was that way. I think a lot of that is lost in modern media because they just want to use it as an allegory for whatever story or whatever political message they want to share.
yeah.
But you try to not do that. All right?
Yes, yes. I'm very,
Nice.
very deliberate about avoiding that.
Mm.
I mean, first of all, I don't have a political agenda unless saying get away from the beast is it like leave that alone. It's horrible. Nobody should want to force other people to do as they like. It's just an irrational, antisocial behavior to do such a thing. So, I guess that is my politics, but like there's not, and again, yeah, it's basically the allegory in there is basically just love. It's more Christian centric, and it's just love your neighbor. Just stop murdering people because they disagree with you. Like,
Yeah.
but
I
it's
think
crazy. We
more people
think,
can probably get on board with that than just Christian,
yeah.
but
Well,
you'd think so, yeah.
exactly. You'd think so, but it's like it is kind of insane that we're in the 21st century and we still have to be screaming that because a lot of people don't seem
Yeah.
to get it. They still don't seem to get, and they don't seem to be able to equate that like ultimately making it illegal does in fact mean that they're willing to kill you over it. Like there, that is always because if somebody refuses to comply with your law, you can lock them in a cage, which is almost as bad as killing them.
Yeah.
And
They
you,
stay
some
there,
might
yeah.
argue it's worse. I could argue it is worse,
I see
especially if
that.
it's for an extended period of time. And
Mm.
especially for a Christian, because you kill me, I'm fine. All my worries are gone. You know, I'm
Good
not
point.
worried about death. but but yeah, it's just. But yeah, I try to. I focus story first. Again, I focused on this world. I focused on making it as real. And the other thing to make it clear is my heroes aren't. I do have some good and evil, like there, and there's clear delineation. But most of the heroes, especially, are not just good. Like they're not just white knights
Not
who are
perfect.
perfect and blemish
Mm.
free. They do have flaws and problems. So it's not like everything they do is like, oh, they're just all Boy Scouts living the perfect Christian life. No, they're just normal people with the same struggles that we have. So I try to make it as real and as consistent as possible, and then I just focus on making characters that are exciting. Again, not just, oh, well, here's my cleric, and that's just a stereotypical cleric. This is another problem I see with fantasy sometimes in modern fantasy. Is it's like, oh, well, this is the healer, this is the barbarian basically, and this is the strategist guy, and this is like they have these very niche roles, and that's who
Mhm.
they are, like their personalities. That no, I have, you can be a great warrior and also like planting daisies. Like I try to do stuff like that, because again, it's I think a lot of people are getting to the point. This is a legitimate fear I have that we're losing the depth of people. Like people are making themselves caricatures because everything we
Mm.
read, everything we consume on media is this like shallow picture of what a person should
I think
be.
that's where the meme of the NPC comes from, where they just
Yep.
all of their thoughts they get from the media, and it's just programmed in, and that's what they think, and that's what they say, and oh, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, but
Oh,
sometimes it seems people are doing it. Like
it looks
they
like it sometimes, yeah, but
so
it's especially sad since they have the capacity for so much more.
exactly.
Mm. And I was thinking, you said that as you were writing the first three books, the Evorath books, that you yourself progressed in your views as you wrote them. I think that sounds neat because it seems like that way you almost couldn't help but make it an organic process in the book because it happened to you as you were writing them. That sounds really neat. As so the Lizok, Liz, Lizlock or
Liza.
Lizok, yeah.
Yep.
The Lizok Prince guy. He actually like they actually do found that town or society, the liberty-based one in the first three books.
Yeah, so it's you don't really see much of that in the first three books, but especially in the third. So you hear about it in the second book. You
Mhm.
hear, oh, there's this outpost that they just set up over there, and that's kind of it. And then in the third book, you meet the Lizak, the Vistoro, who started it, and they talk about it. And then by the end, some of the heroes move there. So it's just getting started out. And then so this new series that's coming out takes place 60 years later. So the town's established. It's now, kind of a vibrant community of people, of artisans, and just people who want to be free. So there's no central authority. It really is. This is where I said like the first books I think are interesting because of what you just said. Yeah, and I think, and I haven't gotten big complaints about it. I think I did a good job of weaving that in as I developed, my characters developed. And I think that made it better for it. Again, I think it made it more organic. It made it more natural to see the progression. The second book, though, I always say is like, yeah, now this is starting with a Liberty Society. And I'll say the society that I wrote in these books is not quite the one that I want necessarily. Because one of the things I do want to
Hmm.
do over the course of Evorath, which is going to be dozens of books. I mean, again,
Oh.
I have this world with a ton of stuff planned out. Um, I want to show a lot of different like voluntarist models. So this one's kind of
Hmm.
more of it's still a little bit bigger than I think is ideal. It's still a little bit more, especially on Earth, they have a little bit more martial leaning, like in terms of strength and defensive force and whatnot. Um, but I think it's a valid, again, that's another thing with the voluntary movement is a lot of people are like, it has to be my way. And it's like, that defeats the whole purpose of this. Like, as long as everyone agrees to live a certain way, then it's okay, as long as it's
Hmm.
realistic too. I
Yeah,
mean,
or even more broadly, as long as you agree not to try to force me to do what you think I should do,
yes.
that's fine. Now, I have actually read the newest book. I got an advance copy of it from Joseph so that I could give reviews about it, and it was really neat because I hadn't read the first three books before reading this first in the Legends of Evorath, right?
Yep.
Yes. And so I was very intrigued at the things that I found in there, but it's not out yet, right? It's coming up.
Yes. So it releases October 29th. So just a couple
Nice.
days before Halloween, if you participate in that holiday. I know some people have mixed feelings about that too.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. So 60 years after the main series. And I think as evident from my experience, you don't have to have read the first three books in order to enjoy this one. And am I right about, or is it better? Would you recommend someone just pick up this one, or that they'll get more out of it if they read the first three first?
I think they could get a little more out of it only because they understand a little bit of what went into getting to where it is. But it's definitely not necessary. Like yeah, it is definitely not necessary. The one thing I'll say is I did so anticipating this release, and I'm going to continue this through the end of the year. I actually bundled the whole trilogy into a one ebook, and I
Hmm.
put it for 99 cents right now. So my thought was you can easily hop in for just 99 cents, read the whole first trilogy. And if you do, again, I think it will give you some fun background. It will, some of the characters are veterans from that book. So it just kind of gives more context, if you will, a little more depth to some of those characters that are not the main characters, but they're in the book.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I can see that. I think when I read it, I enjoyed it. I liked it. One of the things that startled me was how many different races there were with the Lizocs and the Centaurs and the Felites. Because I'm used to just the standard, maybe there's elves, maybe some orcs, but you got like two or three new ones. I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? But
yeah, I just that was part of the thing. I really wanted a world that just had a bunch of, and I think at least to me I don't do too much, but there are, so as you get into some of the future books, you'll find different continents. Even I introduce a few more major fantasy species. There may be Minotaur in the future that you encounter, or there's a race of frog people. So there's a few forthcoming, but most of what you're reading about in this early trilogy, which is admittedly more than most people do, right? Like you said, it's usually like, oh, maybe elves, dwarves, and humans, or oh, added hobbits too. But like usually you don't have. I think it's what, like 8 or 9 different major races that I have in Evorath on this continent of Erythal. It is.
yeah, I think
So
let me see, I've got your website pulled up. I think we can.
Oh yeah, I list out all the ones that are
Yes. So of course people who are listening instead of viewing won't be able to see. But yeah, Evorath.com, and it's got up here at the top, meet the author. Yeah, the lore, and you can check out all of the different kind of not just elves, but dark elves, demons, dryads, elves, Phelites, Lamias, Lizocs, satyrs, centaurs, all kinds of different species, all different cultures. And October 29th, yes, the new one comes out.
I had to include Seder. Actually, I'm glad I included Seder because now with
Mm.
goats, we have some goats I didn't mention. My wife and I got into
Based on
raising
real
goats
life
for dairy.
experience.
Yeah. Well, and so it's the first trilogy when I was writing that, we really didn't get the goats till like that last book. And so the Seder were always kind of just in the background. There was some Seder there. Now, in this next series, there's a Seder kind of major character, and there's going to be more in the future. So, sometimes real life influences stuff like that. There's going to be more Seder because I like goats now. So there's gotta be goat people.
That's funny. I guess the one you're missing is like bird people, something like that. Well, and frog people, but you said they're gonna come later. So
Yes, the frog people are coming.
mm.
Yeah, I don't think so. There's no current plans to have bird people. That is something that I've thought of, though, that maybe I can, but none of the stories I have
Mm.
introduced them, and it wasn't part of my original lore. So again, I try to be. It's not like my world is done. I'm still adding lore. I'm still creating more history and adding more to it, but I try not to make drastic changes. So I don't know if an avian species will make the cut, but we'll see.
Be
If I can come up with a good reason for it, they might.
that's the key. Don't just do it because if it fits
Exactly.
into the world and it makes sense, that's what you gotta do. Yeah,
Yeah.
so the Shadows of Erythal is the name of this book. So, and is the Legends of Evrath going to be another trilogy?
No, so it's gonna have 4 books. So it's gonna be a
Oh,
four-part series.
quartet.
It
Nice.
yeah, and
And
then
yeah, the
there's the map.
map. That is a huge forest.
A lot of
A whole
forest. And
continent.
that's one of the different things that you'll find is again, I feel like a lot of times you mention parallels to Earth, right? With like, oh, police work, and it can be similar between worlds. Part of what I want to do is consider, well, if these are, some of the major species here are centaurs and satyr, and I actually think, and even the Phelite, the cat people, I think they prioritize more. Like Phelite architecture, a lot of the times they'll have their houses built right into the trees just because it's more convenient and because they're cat people, so they might like climbing and it's
Hmm.
just kind of thinking of those little
Yeah,
things
it
that
looks like they control most of this part of the forest.
yeah, they're
Oh,
a very big a big power, if you will.
hmm. Nice.
Um,
Well, so that's
and
coming up.
I will say when October 29th rolls around, I'll update that map. That is actually the map from the first trilogy. So there
Hmm.
are a few updates, nothing too major, but that's another thing I try to do is even book to book, I add like if there's a new location I introduce, I don't include it from the beginning. And the reason I do that is and so the map software I have like a bunch of different copies of this same map, but like, oh, this is this year, this is in this year. And I then I put like the book name and I do that again just because I feel like it adds a little bit more to the instead of just showing them, if you open up book one and you're like, oh wait, what's this? This wasn't in this book at all. I don't want that. I want you to wait till you get the book with that town in it before you learn about its location.
Hmm.
Because you're learning about the world as you get that's kind of my thought process.
Makes sense. So you mentioned ebooks before. Are they available physical as well?
Yes, yes. So right now they are just paperback. I haven't done any hardcover releases,
Okay.
but they are available in paperback, and they are
Nice.
available again. So the way I do it isn't just like the I do it quote unquote the right way. So I actually have a distributor I do it through Ingram Spark to distribute the book. So like if you self-publish through Amazon And even if you do a paperback book, you're only going to sell through Amazon. Like that's it. Versus if you have an actual distributor like that, there are libraries that I've met some librarians that I've sent copies to, and then they've ordered it for
Wow.
their library. And then you can find it at bookstores, and if they don't have it, that's the best. Go to your local bookstore and say, "Hey, can you order this book?" Because that's
I see.
super helpful to help get it out there more.
Hmm.
Um, and they can. Again, a lot of people who self-publish don't necessarily think about that, but that's one of the ways that I can get more reach. Um,
Right.
you know,
Nice. So we will get the first three books right now. Is Shadows of Erythal available for pre-order, or do we just have to wait till the 29th of October?
I think for the paperback, you do have to wait. You can pre-order the Kindle copy, I know. I should know the answer to that. I'm talking about doing this the right way and doing it professionally, and then I don't even
Uh,
know.
that's a lot to
I
keep
don't
track of,
think
though.
that there is a lot to keep track of. Um, yeah, I don't think the paperback you can pre-order. I think you can only pre-order the Kindle, but I'll double check on that.
Okay. And you got a bundle for the ebooks of the first three. Is there a neat bundle for the paperbacks? Because I love actually holding something that I'm
There
reading.
is not
Ah,
yet.
Joseph.
That is, speaking of things like a lot of things, that's one of the things that I am exploring. I don't know yet again, I want to make sure I do it the right way and I don't just like go through Amazon and be like, "Oh, plug this in and here you go."
Pump it out and yeah.
Yeah, so I'm doing a little bit of yeah, I'm just not sure the best way to do that. But that is in the future I do want to have. I mean, I'd love to have the boxes where it has like separate art on the box and you pull, the whole
Mm,
thing. So that's I just need to figure out the best way to do that. Um
yes. Well, I hope you do because I'd like if there's going to be a deal later, should I get them now? But I don't know, maybe the ebook all three for 99 cents sounds like a good deal to me, especially if nicer versions will be coming later that are physical. So it's an important thing. But you folks at home, you go check out Evorath.com, find out more about the world of Evorath that Joseph has built with his writing, and get ready to read the book when it comes out. Go grab the original trilogy for just $1. It's pretty sweet. And get hyped up for October 29th when the new one comes out. I know I am, and I've already read it. So it's pretty great.
yeah,
But
I'm thrilled. And thank you, Jeff, for having me on and for
oh,
being a guest here.
absolutely.
It's happy to be here.
Well, it was great. It's fun to talk fantasy and what people do right and what people do wrong. So, and especially the process that goes on behind the scenes to actually make something that's good and that's worth reading or watching when it comes to the shows. But it's very interesting. So, Joseph, thank you so much for coming on. Any last thoughts, last pitches before we go?
No, just yeah. Again, if you like fantasy, I'd love if you checked out my book. I think it's great. Most people who have read it have told me they've enjoyed it. It's and again, especially that intersection of liberty and fantasy. I think we need more fiction like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm doing it with Evorath. I think we need more. So actually, that's it. If you have ever thought of writing, start. Like, do it. Like, if you're out here watching this or listening and you're like, yeah, I have some story ideas, great, do it. We need more good writers who are writing. I'm paraphrasing C.S. Lewis now. We need more good writers who are going to write good stuff that has good messages. He talked about like we don't need more Christian fiction. We need more good Christian authors writing. We
Just
need more
fiction,
Christian
yeah.
authors writing good stories. Again, I don't know that quote perfectly, but anyways, that's what we need.
Well,
So do it. If you have the inspiration, don't let whatever fears or uncertainty. Um, and heck, reach out to me because Free Dragon Press, the publishing imprint, is mine for that, and I'd love to have new authors come on board too. So there you go.
Very cool. I think part of that goes back to what we were talking earlier about allegory and if and the written word, the fantasy and fiction reflecting what's in the real world. Because it's very easy for people to say, oh, that anarchy, libertarian, voluntary stuff, it would never work in real life. But if you can, and they say that because they can't imagine it working. But if you read something, an imaginary world, granted, but an imaginary world where it does work, and there are so many parallels to the real world, then that can expand the minds of people. And they no longer say, oh, there's no way it can work. But then they say, well, maybe it could work in this way or in this way. And I think that is going to be a really valuable contribution of your books and hopefully the books that the rest of you write who are out there watching this. So, Joseph, again, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And
Thank you.
and thank you everyone for listening. Have a great day. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what we do here, please like, share, subscribe, comment, and go over to our website where you can offer donations, request help us help people who are in need voluntarily. And we'll see you next time.